Welcome, everybody. This is the ESOP Guy. So happy that you could join us today on this journey to an ESOP. And just like all the episodes that we have, it's always exciting to do something new and different. Today will be that. We get to look at other resources that really will help you. And of course, doing the podcast has been really the mission and the vision behind the podcast was to provide a resource that what I would like to say is like just compartmentally gives some information in small doses for people to really work through what an employee stock ownership plan does, what it looks like, how does it benefit you, and so we've been doing that for 3 seasons now, and so today is going to be to help really identify and talk about another resource that I think is going to be very helpful for you. And one of the things with that is to understand sometimes what's out there and what you might want to get involved in that might be really helpful. And so there's an organization in the United States called ESCA, which is ESCA, the Employee-Owned S Corporations of America. And they really are there as they describe themselves on their website as the voice in Washington, D.C. And so to understand what this organization does is you have to understand that an ESOP itself is a creation of legislation from Washington that politicians have voted on and basically said, hey, this is how an employee-owned company will function. These are the tax benefits that an employee-owned company will receive. And so ESCA is primarily focused on the S corporation side. So you as an ESOP company could either be an S corporation or a C corporation. And one of the main differing factors is that an S corporation is going to be a tax exempt entity once they become an ESOP. Well, if they're 100% ESOP, they're tax exempt all the way. If they're partial ESOP, then they're tax exempt for the portion of the company that's owned by the ESOP. And so that's a very big privilege, and it's a very big tax benefit. And that needs to be thought about in terms of how does that get protected and sustained. And so we're gonna talk to Noelle today, Noelle Montano, who is ESCA's executive director. She has represented ESCA for 20 years, and she's a former associate with a major Washington, D.C. law firm. She's also been a legislative director for the House and Ways and Means Committee for Chairman Bill Archer, and she holds a law degree from George Mason University School and a bachelor's degree from Duke University. So with all of that, I wanted to properly introduce you, Noelle. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you, Phil. And I also want to thank you on behalf of ESCA for all of your efforts to promote ESOPs. I think education is really the #1 thing to having more ESOPs in this country. So we're really glad to be here, and thank you for this.
Awesome. So to start off, just so that, I gave you a little bit of an intro, but how did you get involved with ESOPs when it all started? I mean, it sounded like you had a law degree and you were very involved with politics.
I was. So I did work on Capitol Hill for 7 years. I was very fortunate that my hometown member of Congress, Bill Archer from Houston, Texas, ended up becoming the House Ways and Means Committee chairman in January 1995 after the 1994 election. So while I certainly didn't grow up and think I want to be a tax lobbyist or I want to work on ESOP issues, I was fortunate to get my start in tax policy by working for Chairman Archer. And then after being in a law firm for a couple of years, a lot of lawyers eventually want to escape that world. And I was fortunate to be connected with Stephanie Silverman. So Stephanie is the founder and CEO of ESCA. She was instrumental in advocating for the creation of S Corporation ESOP. So when Congress changed the law in 1996 and created them, that's because Stephanie was working with a small handful of companies to advocate and say they're C Corporation ESOPs. Why can't there be S Corporation ESOPs? So when I met Stephanie, she said, I have this small coalition that's just getting started. If this works out, I have a job for you. So 20 years later, here I am today, and ESCA is almost 200 member companies strong.
Awesome. Yeah. So that's a long time to be at any organization. So you must love it there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what a privilege it is to represent employee-owned companies, right? an
Absolutely.
issue that makes members of Congress light up. The response you may get usually if you introduce yourself is, oh, I love ESOPs. They might not know anything about what an ESOP is, but that's the response.
So with the way you work in ESCA, are you walking down the halls of Washington, D.C. and then people say, here comes Noelle. I know what she's going to talk to me about.
Ideally, that is the case with the members of Congress that we focus on are primarily on the tax writing committee, so the House Ways and Means Committee and Senate Finance Committee. And if that is as much as they know is Noelle equals ESOPs or Stephanie equals ESOPs, we've done our job. So we've done part of our job.
Exactly. So let's expand that a little bit. I mean, ESCA started with what Stephanie saw as a vision and a need. Obviously, you don't start an organization unless you see that there's a true need. The mission that ESCA's on, as it started and maybe as it is in 20 years, is it really kind of like, let's define the mission and then talk about how that has changed over the 20 years?
Well, ESCA at its heart is an advocacy organization. So unlike some other organizations in the ESOP space that do great research and data and education and help companies, run their ESOP, promote their ESOP, we're, again, mission focused on advocacy. And the advocacy is to ensure that Congress does not change for the negative the S corporation ESOP structure. And as you mentioned, Congress changed a law back in 1996. So what they created, they could easily undo. And, you've talked about it's definitely a complicated entity when you marry a pass-through with a qualified retirement savings plan. So that complexity means there are a lot of things that could happen. So our mission is to make sure that the laws do not change to mess up what was done so well in terms of the tax structure of an S corporation ESOP.
That's awesome. So that's a very clear mission. And it sounds like you obviously have staff that are doing the advocacy. And the membership of ESCA, how does that work in relationship to having them involved in the same mission?
Mm-hmm. Well, it works in a number of different ways. I think we give the assurances to our member companies that we are their eyes, their ears, their voice in Washington, so that they know they can focus on running their companies. They can do what they're experts in, but that they can also be supportive of ESCA. And we like to say, while Stephanie and I and the rest of our team can be excellent lobbyists, truly the best people to tell this story are the employee owners, whether it's a C-suite executive talking about the jobs they've created, the impact on the community, or even more powerfully, it's the line employees, the construction worker, the factory worker, the secretary who's been at an employee-owned company for 20 years, 30 years, and they are saving for retirement in a way that they never, ever could have dreamed of, and that's providing opportunities for their family. So those are the stories that members of Congress remember.
And they get to talk about if they're supportive of ESOPs, right? And they're campaigning or however they have strategized to be reelected. I would imagine that's great.
Exactly. And it's such a positive message, because if you think about just the political discourse and the differing opinions on issues ranging from trade to healthcare to other economic issues, that we really are a bridge between the parties. I think employee ownership is something that anybody of any political persuasion can support for a reason. And I think we also like to remind policymakers that this was intentionally done. I mean, you referenced the great tax benefits that come from it, but it's not a loophole. It was intentionally created by Congress to promote retirement savings and employee ownership. So our message is, you all did something great back in 1996, and we're here to share with you that it's working even better than you could have anticipated. And we're sharing that message both through connecting them with their member companies back home and the data and research that we provide.
So in a given year, because some people don't go lobbying in Washington, what are some of the examples of efforts? I know, being an advocate, I would imagine you're meeting with the staff of the congressman or whatever. What are some of the specifics that you guys engage in order to continue to support the message of supporting S corporation ESOPs? Basically, that's the
right.
primary.
Well, I think Important to note that we're playing defense and we're playing offense. So the defense is our overall mission of ensuring that nothing is done to impact the S Corp ESOP structure. And it depends on what the current threat is. There's, ongoing tax policy activity. There was a tremendous amount, especially with the new administration. The Biden administration had a number of tax policy ideas, things like a new corporate minimum tax, a book income tax, a tax on, stock buybacks, things like that we have to be mindful of, because again, of the nuances that members of Congress are looking at these broad-based policy ideas. They're not thinking, unless we're there to think for them and tell them, how would that potentially impact an S corporation ESOP? So our defensive efforts have to be pretty widespread. There's also things to look at, such as limitations on retirement savings plans. Would somebody get the idea to say, oh, we should cap retirement savings accounts at $2 million, $3 million. And while that may sound like a lot of money to some people, those of us in the retirement savings business know that, you need a large figure to be assured of a strong retirement. And you could always dial that back. If they capped it at 3 million, what's to say they're not going to cap something at 2 million? So defensive efforts are number one and part of our mission. But also to support those efforts, we do play offense. And ESCA has worked with members of the Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee on legislation to encourage the creation of more S corporation ESOPs.
I like
and
it.
So that
like a 1042, like a 1042.
Exactly. 1042 for S corporation sellers is the heart and soul of this bill. I know you had Corey Rosen on a recent episode, and Corey talked about his work to create the 1042 provision in the first place for C corporation ESOPs. So our message on 1042 is, if Congress truly wants to incentivize employee ownership further, let's provide that same incentive for an S corporation seller. And there's finally been some movement on that. The House and Senate this year and last year have been working on a bipartisan retirement savings bill. And we got a small portion of 1042 in the bill that was passed by the House, and that same small portion in the bill that was passed by the Senate Finance Committee. So it's wrapped up into a broader package, and the fate of that package is murky at best right now. As you know, members of Congress are back home campaigning for re-election. So when they come back after the midterms, they'll have a list of items that they want to finish up this year. We're hopeful, because of the broad bipartisan support for this retirement savings bill, that it will ultimately be attached to something that's moving and pass the House and the Senate again, and get signed into law, but it's unclear. But do want to stress that it really is a great symbolic victory to have part of 1042 included. I mean, that really shows the support at the highest level of the leadership of the Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee for doing more to promote S corporation ESOPs.
No, I think that's, I know you have to move, sometimes inch by inch to get to where we want to go eventually, which is the same benefits as a C corp you get as an S corp when it comes to 1042. And there really isn't any logical reason why you can't, in my head, because except for we're taking money out of the government's budget. So
that's exactly what it is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One thing I want to make sure I stop, I always have to do this too, because some people, maybe jump on right now and they're like, I don't even know what 1042 is. So real quickly, a 1042 is when you sell your company to an ESOP and you're able to defer the capital gains on the ESOP by using a like-kind exchange. And so you exchange the private stock that you sold it for a qualified replacement property, which is our eligible stock that you can hold. So in order to actually not have to pay the capital gains on the portion that gets set up in the QRP. So there's a whole podcast on 1042, but what's interesting about this is S corporations have the benefit of an exemption, but if you get the 1042, in addition to that, it would be a super powerful opportunity and benefit for people to do more ESOPs, which will really help everybody in the country dramatically.
I think it would also help in education efforts too. So even a seller that doesn't necessarily end up utilizing 1042, it just may bring the attention of ESOPs to more sellers looking to transition out of the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
it stimulates a ton of activity. And as we talked about, like you mentioned, Corey's conversation was like, this is really good for the country in so many ways, but definitely with wealth transfer. And equalizing some of the gaps that have been created over the last 5 to 10 to 20 years. And so that would be a good thing for everybody, which is partly why, as we think about, one of the things I wanted to talk about, which I'm not a expert with in politics. It's actually something I don't really like as much, because maybe some of the obvious reasons. But when we think about bipartisan support, ESOPs are fun to talk about with politics because we do have more of a bipartisan support. Talk about that a little bit, from being having more political experience and being more of an expert at that level.
I mean, first of all, I think it's just such a positive message. Again, you're talking about employee ownership, you're talking about retirement savings. I think there's something that appeals to members that are leaning more towards the left side of the aisle, that like that the workers have this power, the workers are engaged, kind of just the spirit of employee ownership really speaks to them. And on the right, it could be more of like, this is capitalism at its best, right? These are private companies. All they needed, with this structure, they are growing, they're adding jobs. It's just, I mean, the data supports how strong these companies are and the culture that it builds. And I think when members of Congress, regardless of which party they're in, go to visit one of these companies, we love when they come out of it and say, this feels different. I can tell that this feels different. So it really does transcend politics to some extent, in terms of the bipartisan support. Back when tax reform was being worked on, it was ultimately passed in 2017, but there was work being done on that for a number of years. The Senate Finance Committee had some subgroups of senators that were working on retirement savings issues. And the lead Republican and the lead Democrat who are chairing the retirement savings group are big supporters of ESOPs, and they kind of joked with us, with ESCA, saying this is like, I mean, they're partially joking, but they said this is one of the few issues that we both can agree upon. And that's really validating, and that really resonates. And I think you'll continue to find that's the case. When you look at some of the supporters of the legislation that we have, you could have some really conservative Republicans and some really liberal Democrats and anyone in between. Again, it speaks to everybody. And I think that's part of the power behind ESOPs and employee ownership.
Yeah, I know that, like, I'm pretty negative about the government in general, just as, I think about what they've done to do things like they want to try to help somebody, and I get it, but they end up kind of screwing it all up. But with ESOPs, they actually have helped. Like, this is one thing I would say the government has done very well.
And we love to hear that, right? And that's what's really funny. I mean, you can go meet with a member of Congress that wasn't in Congress back in 1996. There are not a lot of them still around that were there. But if we say Congress did something right, like they sit up a little straighter, they look a little proud, like, yes, we did. And they understand how more should be done. And particularly, I know you've cited in previous episodes, like just the retirement savings, the lack of retirement savings, when you think that, half of working Americans go to work every day at a place that does not offer any retirement savings plan. When at ESOP companies, those employee owners have at least one retirement savings plan, the ESOP, that's wholly provided by the employer. And when we surveyed our ESCA member companies, more than 90% also offer a 401k. So that really just shows the commitment to the workers that these companies have.
Yeah, like the workers are going to have a future. I mean, we all assume that the companies can continue to grow in value, but if all that works out, they have the ability to retire. And I think the biggest question for people now is, what does Social Security look like in the future? I mean, that becomes a bigger issue. And as we get closer and closer to the baby boomers, really retiring, that's questionable. So this is going to be a very, very big opportunity for people if we just keep the pace and grow with new ESOP companies.
Exactly. And I think looking back towards kind of the heart of the pandemic, members of Congress, we did a ton of virtual meetings with them. They were very interested, of course, in how are your companies doing? What are you doing for your employee owners? And it was just such an incredible story that our companies had to tell about looking out for their employee owners. and, making sure that even if many of them were in essential services that were coming to work, about how they were taking care of them, how they rallied together, how they got through, weathered the storm together, just as they did in the 2007 recession, that there was a lot of data there. But I think, just that speaks to the continuity, the stability of these businesses that try not to lay people off, because they realize when the good times come back around, they want their workers and they need their workers. So
Yeah.
I think that was something that policymakers were also very interested in.
Yeah, no, I think that's having a bigger picture of what workers need in the future. And so I think that creates great opportunity with ESCA as we think about the actual organization as a
Mhm.
resource. How do you help existing S Corp ESOPs? So you're going to have like that as probably part of your membership, right? And what percentage of your membership are those types of companies?
99.5% of our members are already S Corporation ESOPs. There are a tiny handful of companies that say we want to join ESCA right away, but it's primarily companies that have already done the transaction. Sometimes we get them right after the transaction, so they're still a little, blurry-eyed, and it's been quite a process to do that transition. But first of all, we're an advocacy resource, again, as I mentioned, that they can feel the confidence and the assurance that we're their eyes, ears, voice in Washington, so that their leadership of those companies are able to tell their employee owners, we belong to ESCA, so that we can tell you we are doing everything in our power to ensure that this ESOP structure that is so important to our company remains in place, both for your generation and the next generation of our company's employee owners. So we're the advocacy resource. We also help them build political connections through their lobbying efforts, whether they're up on the Hill or bringing members of Congress back to visit their companies. And those connections can come in handy for non-ESOP related issues, whether it's a company that's in the infrastructure space or the energy space or something like that. They might not have been politically involved before. And I think what they learn from attending ESCA events is the importance it is of being politically involved and connected to policymakers, because you don't know when you might need that help. And it's much better to have that relationship before something's on fire. I think we're also a resource in the C-suite network that we provide. It's really fun at our conferences to see, even when the programming's over, everyone's still hanging out together at the bar. Connecting. And I think a number of business relationships are formed that have nothing to do with the ESOP, just because of the networking connections. And I think they very much appreciate the connections to bounce ideas off each other. What are you doing for repurchase? What are you hearing on this issue? That it's at the most senior level with the company decision makers that they are, coming together through the forum that ESCA provides. And then I also think that we help build internally support with the employee owners, because sometimes they'll come up for lobby days, or by the employee owners at the, the more junior level, participating in a member of Congress visiting their company, or us coming out to give a political update. I think it also encourages all of the employee owners how important it is to be a mindful and thoughtful voter, recognizing that the people you elect can have a very real impact on your company.
Yeah, no, those are awesome. I like that. And this is what I was thinking, that because I see this a lot with a lot of the ESOPs that I help kind of create and form, is like you said, they are a little bit blurry-eyed. They are a little bit, let's just say, they've dealt with all the ESOP people, right? The professionals, which are, we went through a transaction. So you've got the trustee, you've got the valuation firm, you've got the attorneys. All these are great people, but there's something about once you get through that whole process that you want to talk to other people that are ESOP companies. And so and just kind of like some of it, share my experience. It's like, hey, how did you guys do this? Or how are you doing that? And I think that's to me, a huge benefit is if you think about ESCA's membership and, looking at like, that's a pretty high percentage of their membership being dedicated to those types of companies. And so, just with, obviously the political part's very important, but just the other side of it is, as I know, these companies, they just want to talk to people. Maybe their HR people need to talk to people. Maybe they're thinking about, how to communicate the message of the ESOP better. There's just a lot of topics to delve in. And as much as I like to talk about ESOPs, it's just much better to talk to somebody that's been doing it for years, as an existing company, and maybe even similar industries too,
Right, exactly. Do you want to meet with someone in your industry, a company that's similar in size and revenue to you, that we can help connect them and match them up and be a resource in that way?
So how many meetings do you guys have a year? Do you have I'm sure you do conferences, and maybe we can.
Right. We do 2 annual conferences. So our kickoff event every year is the week of President's Day in February, where we're in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We have a lot of members that are in the Midwest area. So of course, they're super happy about getting out of the cold in February. And it's just exciting. It's our kickoff event of the year. Every 2 years, it's a new Congress. So every 4 years, it could be a new administration. So we're really laying out the political and policy outlook for the year ahead. We typically have 3 to 4 members of Congress who join us to speak to our attendees and do breakout sessions this is all over the course of about 2.5 days in Fort Lauderdale. And then our Federal Policy Conference and Lobby Day is held in September every year. We just finished that last month. We had almost 200 people. We had 26 teams that we took up to Capitol Hill. So we covered with those teams about 100 congressional offices. We had anywhere from 2 to 5 people on each lobby day team. And that really gave us a chance, again, to be back up in person for the first time. We had not held an in-person lobby day since 2019. So the muscle memory was still fresh. We could still do this, but that was exciting to have everyone up on Capitol Hill. So it's similar programming to Florida in terms of the speakers, a political outlook, members of Congress, but it's also half days on Thursday afternoon and Friday morning to go up to Capitol Hill. And then recently we've launched a series of regional conferences to particularly touch our members and membership prospects that might just not be able to make it out to DC or to Florida. So we'll be in San Diego in October. And then yes, it's not a bad place to go in October. We've already I think we have people coming from the East Coast just because it's such a nice venue, and why not go to San Diego and spend time with some good ESCA people. And then next year we'll be in Boston, Chicago. For the first time, we're doing Dallas, and then back to San Diego.
Cool.
So that's go ahead.
The regional conferences are trying to get people together more. Is that the goal of doing?
They are, and it's trying to make it easier for people geographically and time-wise. These are a shortened version of our annual conferences, our big annual conferences. So it's really just kicks off with a Monday night reception and dinner, and then programming that would end by 3 p.m. the next day. So it's one night at the hotel, easy in and out. Our California conference in particular is probably the attendance might be about 40% California residents. So it's really, easy for them to get there. And again, price points lower.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so think about so existing companies, but for those that are not yet an ESOP, some of them, that's primarily, I would say, my audience. How does ESCA support those kind of companies?
I think through the work that we do in Washington, I hope that would give business owners that are considering transitioning to an ESOP a greater sense of assurance that this policy won't change. Again, we've been doing this for 20 years. Stephanie's been at it since the very beginning. It's personal. It's a very real commitment that we have to protecting the structure. So hopefully that, gives them an assurance and confidence that if they do this transition and take all of the time and money that it requires to transition to an S Corporation ESOP, that there is an organization that is dedicated to the continuity of that model. I think the network and guidance that we talked about for existing members is still, it can still be a resource for companies that have not transitioned yet. If someone were to get in touch with ESCA and say, could you point me to a great advisor? Could you point me to another company, again, that's in my industry or my size or geographic area? Because I'd really like to just, pick their brain about whether we should do this transition. We can do that. And I think the data and studies that ESCA continually pushes out, we tend to partner with National Center for Employee Ownership almost every year on a study, say looking at retirement savings benefits or looking at the workforce. We work with other economists also and pollsters to come out with new data, because that's really important to our political messaging, to have the data back up this story. But I think those studies are probably useful for companies that are not yet S corporation ESOPs or not our members, both for, educating people about the value of an S ESOP and what a difference it can make for your company if you transition, and what a difference it makes for your employee owners in particular to help build their support and engagement. Because a lot of employees, if you're told like, oh, we're going to become ESOP owned, like, they don't know what that means at first.
They
and
do not.
It's pretty exciting once they understand, but it may take, really some strong education efforts to do that. And I think probably the data and studies can back that up, because we've looked at things like how do millennials, feel about an ESOP, and do the younger generations have a better understanding about the importance of retirement savings because they're getting that in an ESOP owned company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great, I didn't actually think about that, but being able to publish some data to solidify it maybe, or as you become an ESOP company, be able to publish that data in your communication of your ESOP. So I think that's a great advantage.
Go ahead.
I was going to come back to the same thing, like these guys being able to talk to other companies that have gone through the course, I think is very, very valuable for, companies that aren't yet ESOPs, and they can kind of think about what are the pitfalls they saw, or what are the things that they experienced through the process.
What would you do differently? What would you recommend?
So that's really good. So going into just thinking about like the challenges that face ESOPs right now, and either existing ones or thinking about the future, what would you say are the greatest challenges facing?
Right. Well, from my political lens, I would say it's the turnover in Congress. We're losing some really important champions for S corporation ESOPs at the most senior level of the Ways and Means Committee and the Finance Committee. These are members of Congress that we have strong personal relationships with, that are personally invested. They're the members that would, jump in front of the train that's moving towards S ESOPs, and they're retiring. And there's this continual churn, but I think that pace has increased over the past few years. I mean, it's not necessarily a fun place to be. It's a very difficult job for even more reasons than it probably was a decade ago. So that means that we have to be very forward thinking and continually building up this bench of allies and champions that are going to make S corporation ESOPs one of their top issues. So we have to be very strategic at looking at members of Congress where we have strong company presence, where there's another reason we would have a personal connection, and do they want to take on this issue and make it one of their top issues? So that's the biggest political challenge, really. I mean, we've gotten really good at, batting down the threats and arguing about why ESOP shouldn't be subject to this entity level tax or these retirement contribution limits, but it really is an ongoing effort to educate members and to get them invested. I mean, should the House flip to Republican control, there could be 10 new Republican members on the House Ways and Means Committee next year. And we're starting to look at, because of our connections and because of what we do, we have a list of who those members are likely to be, and we're starting to connect them with our companies, get to know their staff. But with turnover like that, that's a lot of people to educate. And that means you've got a lot of senior members that haven't been in Congress that long and may not be personally invested.
That's a lot of work. Yeah, because you start literally completely over, I would imagine, just like, now, like, what is an ESOP, right? They may even be completely inexperienced.
Exactly. And what level of detail do you need to get into, between like talking about deferral and things like that, or really just like, hey, an ESOP is, a retirement savings plan for the employee owners. And I think the other main political challenge is just the, fiscal concerns and the ongoing need for revenue. Congress will always be looking for revenue. It depends on the day whether they seek to offset tax cuts with tax increases, I think, and they would do that through what are called pay-fors. If you're going to, cut taxes on one hand, then you better raise revenue on the other hand so that there's zero impact to the Treasury. those tax cuts. And that's something that, of course, we were concerned about back when in 2017 with the tax reform efforts. The primary reason for tax reform at that point was to lower C corporation rates, with the message of let's make American businesses more competitive with other businesses, around the world. And so to lower C corporation rates, that's really expensive to do. And so everything was on the table at that point. And then we had to be very, vigorous about defending S corporation ESOPs and saying, you don't want to chip away at S corporation ESOPs to lower C corp rates by 0.001%. But there's always going to be the need for tax revenue. When you are a tax expenditure, which is anything that costs Treasury revenue, you're always on a list. So you're never done. There's no way to pass a law that says S corporation ESOPs are the greatest thing Congress has ever done. They should be protected forever and ever. That doesn't happen. So I think it's that, being mindful of the revenue and the tax activity that will always occur. It doesn't matter who's in control of the House or Senate, who's in the White House. There will be a need to do tax policy. And whenever there's a need to do tax policy, something could happen on the S Corp side, something could happen on the ESOP side, and that work will continue. And I think it's been looked at, even when there is, say, a Democrat in the White House and a Republican, if it's a Republican House and Senate, sometimes when there's two parties involved, more activity happens, that there's, a likelihood that there will be more. And then I'm sure you probably talked about in prior episodes, the lack of regulatory guidance from the Department of Labor. Valuation issues, that continues to be a challenge for ESOPs. That's something that ESCA works on both through ongoing conversations with the Department of Labor, urging them to issue these adequate consideration regulations that the community's been asking for quite some time. We've also worked with members of Congress to encourage them to utilize their oversight of the agencies and encourage the Department of Labor to do that. And then finally, I think our companies, what we hear, they're facing, similar to other companies, workforce challenges, just finding enough workers. Again, business is good. Our companies we hear from are doing really, really well in this economy, and that's exciting. But they tell us, and they tell members of Congress when they have the opportunity to meet with them, their challenge really is finding enough skilled workers.
Yeah, no, I was curious on the Department of Labor thing, just to go back to that for a second, because I know that's been a long-term issue. It's like you're almost, you have the DOL process agreement that does kind of lay out some steps for the trustee, but there isn't anything definitive. And are you guys making progress with that? I mean, it's like talking to them, or do you see anything coming out of the efforts there?
Well, we've made progress in terms of the Senate Help Committee. They passed legislation. It's their portion of the retirement savings bill that I referenced earlier that would direct the Secretary of Labor to issue these regulations. So that's some really good progress. Again, we're not sure what's going to ultimately happen with the bill. I think we're just trying to keep the lines of dialogue open with the Department of Labor. Should they eventually start the regulatory process, I think we're well equipped to respond and issue comments. And it's really just about having the rules of the road. I think that's what the community wants, is we can, and we know it's rare when we talk to members of Congress, they're like, you want regulation? We're like, yes, we do. That gives us some stability and assurances that we want rules. We want good ESOPs. We just want clear guidance on these valuation issues that we've been asking for.
Yeah, I mean, and it affects everything. It affects the way the deals are done, then the variance, and then the potential cost for an investigation or a DOL audit or a lawsuit. Then that becomes extremely expensive. And I've got an episode that's coming out about just the way that those are handled, and then insurance costs have gone up, right? And
they have.
Who does it really negatively affect? It affects the employees of these companies. Yeah, because the value of the businesses have to incur the cost to manage all of those steps, in addition to just paying down debt and things that you have to normally do. So I think that would help everybody if the Department of Labor were much clearer about what they want this to look like.
Exactly. And ESCA is concerned that it could be chilling the marketplace to some extent, right? You've got business owners that are thinking about selling to an ESOP, and then they hear about these Department of Labor issues and they think, do I really want to risk this? Is that too much of a, just too much of a
Do I want to,
too
yeah, do I want to
expensive?
step into this? Yeah. Place.
And
So yeah, I think that that's interesting too. Like, so that was kind of my next question as we think about the what we call the silver tsunami, and the silver tsunami are all these companies really coming in at almost the same time or around the same time of looking at their own exit plans, and using, obviously ESOP is a popular way to go. How are you seeing that in terms of what you're seeing on a day-to-day basis from your own dealings?
Yeah, I think it's more of what we're hearing from our professional advisors, that there's a lot of enthusiasm. They're doing a lot of deals. So that's very encouraging to us, because again, we don't tend to see the companies until they've actually done the transaction and they are S corporation ESOPs. But I think just anecdotally, just hearing again from the advisors that there's a lot of enthusiasm, that they're doing more deals than ever before. That's really encouraging. I think if we can get some more momentum and get 1042 partially across the finish line with a small benefit, that will help. But it's, that's a really important question and a good issue. And Jared Bernstein, who's a well-known economist who serves on President Biden's Council of Economic Advisors, he did a paper for ESCA that we released in 2021. And he looked at why there aren't more S corporation ESOPs, like what are the hurdles to companies transitioning to that status? And his answers really weren't surprising to us, but it was good just to have this out there. It's education, it's awareness, and sometimes there are owners in pockets where there aren't enough advisors that are in the field. We have a lot of companies that are in the Kansas City area, in the Chicago area. That's because some of the best advisors for S corporation ESOPs are located there. So if you have companies that are somewhere and they're talking to their accountant and their attorney, they might not be given the suggestion of an ESOP.
Yeah, or even worse, they may be detracted from it because their advisor doesn't understand them, and they because they don't understand them, they're negative about them. They might even say, hey, don't even think about an ESOP because it's too complicated, it's too costly, it's this and that and the other thing. And so that's part of the podcast. I mean, that's part of really promoting what an ESOP is throughout the entire country. And that's why having ESCA and other organizations are very important, because we do need more education and people need to know that it's definitely a viable option. And I think the last time I looked at it was like 7,000 companies or ESOPs in the country. Is that about what you have?
7,000 ESOPs and closer to 3,500, 4,000 ESOPs.
Yeah. So that's not a big number, when you think about it, right? With all the companies in the country. So, it makes me think that there's a lot of work to be done to communicate that this is a very viable option.
And that's exactly what Jared's point was. And then kind of looking at how can the government, whether it's at the federal level, state level, or local level, provide some of this education and support for ESOPs. It's ultimately going to benefit the local communities and the states to keep those businesses in the area.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, benefits everybody. Yeah. And we've done podcast episodes with companies that were going to sell to Mr. Big, and then they stayed, and then the community kept the jobs. And I mean, it's a very big part of our economy that, you can't overlook. And so it just makes sense from a lot of different fronts that way. So knowing what kind of to finalize what we're talking about, what do you think the long-term future of ESOPs are for the United States?
I would say future's bright. And I think economically, the studies back us up. Again, I referenced that we have studies for how did ESOP companies do during the 2007 to 2009 recession, how resilient the companies were during the pandemic. And I think it's because as you get to know these companies and their leadership and their employee owners, there's that commitment to their employees. There's the commitment to building for the future. And that resonates across generations of employee owners. There's the commitment to their community. I think a lot of these companies do a tremendous amount of community service and support organizations locally in their community. I think politically, it goes back to what we talked about ESOPs being a bipartisan bridge, that we've got to find issues that members across the aisle can communicate on and work on together, despite the very real difficulties and, contentious topics that they deal with on a regular basis, that we can be a solution to the challenge with the retirement savings crisis or challenges that Congress would be looking to solve if they're not tied up in all of these other issues. And I think on ESCA's end, we're really excited about the future. Next year, we will be celebrating 25 years of S Corporation ESOP. So while the bill was passed in 1996, the effective date was 1/1/98. So we intend to be, living it up for 25 years.
It'll be a big celebration year. That'll be awesome.
Absolutely. And then here's to the next 25 years, right? Keep it going.
Yep, keep it going. Well, great. Well, great work, Noelle. Thank you for doing that. And for everybody that is at ESCA, we applaud the efforts. That we know it's important, but it's really helpful to hear what you guys really do. And I think anybody can go to your website, esca.com.
ESCA.us, sorry.
ESCA.us, okay.
Plug.
I almost plugged you, but then I screwed up the whole thing, but ESCA.us. So anybody can go there, of course, and we encourage you to do that. But to understand what you do is really helpful, and hopefully this gives us a platform to help you guys spread the word more and get more membership and more support and the things that you're doing to really help promote ESOPs.
We really appreciate that, Phil, because again, we're a small organization. As ESOPs, you mentioned, if there's 3,000 to 4,000, it's not a big issue, but we have to play big so that we're competitive and that our voices are heard in Washington. So that's the only way that you'll get anything done, is to have a regular presence here and have your voice heard. And with such a positive message, we can do that. So thank you for helping us promote that message.
Great. Well, thank you again, Noelle. So with that, we look forward to our next step on this journey to an ESOP. Have a great day, everybody.